mouthful. So Laura, you have a lesson coming up with your junior high kids.
We are going to be teaching elements of a story, or reviewing elements of a story and then building, because they've been learning elements of a story for many years in elementary.
Okay, so this is sort of a culminary of past learnings being brought together in your class.
Yes, it's past learnings, but then we're building on it. So in the past, they've identified elements of a story and they recognize them. Now we're actually going to analyze how well an author presents elements of a story within a story.
So thinking about this unit and the lesson that you're thinking of specifically, what do you want the kids to know and be able to do at the end of the unit?
At the end of the unit, I want them to be able to recognize elements of a story within a story as they're reading it, and afterwards be able to evaluate whether the author has done a good job with each element of the story. So they have to tell me and evaluate each element of the story and how the author did.
So the lesson that's coming up, it fits in where in this process?
Well, this whole unit is about a week and a half long.
Okay.
We review from the beginning, we start with a PowerPoint and we take notes. And then we move into reading the story, and we read it twice because students get a different thing out of each story every time we read it. And we have a different goal every time we read also, so it helps set a purpose for learning. So there are a lot of little targets that happen in there as well as doing elements of the story.
So where does this fit in the larger picture of your power standards in the district?
Elements of a story is one of the power standards for 7th grade language arts, and it fits into the whole reading cycle. So
Okay.
it's the first one, and then there's actually a common formative assessment that goes with this unit also.
So you have a common formative assessment. Do you also have some other assessments that you're doing along the way to make sure that students are grasping the key ideas?
Yes, we do a lot of stuff along the way as far as working together in pairs. So for example, the first time that they read the story, they read it simply for understanding. It's a science fiction story, so they have to kind of grasp some science fiction concepts in order to understand it. The second time we read it, we listen aloud on the computer. And the reason I do that is because then the students can hear a really good voice with the story, and inflection on voice often changes meaning. And so they get something more out of it the second time they read it or listen to it. As they're listening to it, they make sticky notes in their book that identifies where the story elements happen. And the way we scaffold that is first I help model on the screen as we do it for the first page. The second page I model a little less, and then they're on their own. But for each page, they also talk with their table. So that way, if they didn't understand it, they can get stuff from their table. And I see a lot of students' light bulbs happen that way. Oh, I get it now. And then they can start marking in their book.
Okay. So they're working in pairs and they're working in table groups. How do you help the struggling kids?
This is where the table groups help. There's several items that help throughout this unit with the kids who struggle. One is listening out loud. So the students who struggled with the comprehension of reading the story the first time, when you hear it out loud the second time, it helps with comprehension as well as helping with the other things that we're doing. Another is the scaffolding on the screen, because I can model for them what I'm doing, and I find that when I do that, a lot of students take my ideas and do it that way. So I show them several different ways to use sticky notes in the book, and then I scaffold less per page, and then I watch and see if the students are still getting it. Also, the discussion at their table helps, because if they didn't get it from me, then sometimes when a peer tells them, then they can get it that way too.
So when you're looking at the scaffolding and going through it, and some of the students might be struggling a little bit, but their table mates are helping them out, what happens if more than just a few kids aren't getting it?
If more than just a few kids aren't getting it, then I go back to the original identifying. And the culminating activity, I want students to analyze story elements. I want them to tell me how well the author presented each story element. Some students aren't there yet. Some students are still at identifying. And so at that case, those students get a differentiated assignment that allows them to identify the story elements, and that's good for them.
Okay, so you really are looking at accelerating the kids that are moving ahead, but
Yes.
also scaffolding for the students that need a differentiated
Yes,
instruction.
I actually used to do this assignment where all they had to do was identify. All the students identified. And then I realized they've been doing that for several years. We actually need to move up a little bit. So I jumped up to evaluating, and that's why students are now evaluating how the story elements are done. Some students are still at identifying, and that's why it helps them to be successful to have the differentiated assignment.
So you have a very clear idea of what you want the kids to know and be able to do. What are you paying attention to yourself for your own learning during this lesson?
I watch how the students are able to tackle the assignment, if they're really comfortable tackling each section of the assignment. I have on the assignment an example, and sometimes doing it with them helps them to understand the example better. So once I've done one with them, then they go, oh, I can do that, and so they move on. There are several parts of this assignment that actually tackle some other things too. They have to cite from the book in quotations and then put the line number in parentheses. And so, having those multiple levels ups the level of understanding too.
So you have a very clear idea of what you want the kids to know and what you're learning along with that. One last question. As the kids are, let me reframe it. As you see the kids progressing and getting excited, how would you like to see them taking this and making it their own and taking it in new directions that you never thought of before?
That's a great question. One thing I do like to do is get these kids excited about reading in general. This particular story comes out of a chapter of a book, and I have had students go and find the book and check it out, and that's pretty cool. So that's one way to kind of get them interested in that. As far as taking this above and beyond the assignment, I will have to reflect and think about that, because I don't know that I have thought about them taking it to other disciplines or to taking it to something else we're doing in our classroom. Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Unless you want to talk about
No,
something.
I'm good.
So as you reflect about the morning and how the lesson went, how did it go? I'm assuming this is what you wanted to talk about.
It is,
Okay.
yep, right on the money, yep.
How did it go in comparison to what you planned?
Well, we knew there would be some bumps because we're trying to walk that fine line between wanting to teach about the language of the framework and then wanting to teach some of the strategies that it's talking about, because we have a wide range of skill levels. And we have some people for whom this is just a description of what's going on in their classrooms and in their planning all the time, every day. And then we have other people who, it's some of these things are like, oh, either it wasn't really anything that was part of their preparation, when they were becoming a teacher, or it's something that's very new to them, or it's something that they used to know and do, but it's just fallen, something that's not really part of their practice anymore. So we have this really wide range of people that we're preparing. And then there's always that tricky piece of Roz and I we're wanting to do the lesson for the people who will be doing the lesson. And so there's that double, which we've been experiencing with the Danielson training, where you're watching the trainer and you're wanting to understand the material at the same time that you're wanting to understand how the trainer is presenting the material. And so on the flip side of that, we're wanting to, teach it and roll it out, and at the same time, make sure people have the right tools so that they can roll it out.
So are you and Roz co-teaching it, or is one teaching and the other one doing the commentary on the side, so to speak?
Oh, no, we're not really doing it that way, although that's a really good thought for the future, is that maybe one of us could teach it and the other could be the voice, the trainer voice on the side.
Yeah. The
Yes.
voiceover.
Right, the voiceover, yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
So how are you differentiating between when you're presenting the material and when you're talking about how to present the material?
Well, today, we just kind of did this, or say, okay, now stepping out of the presenting mode, and then would say something. But I think it's almost like I feel like I want to put a different hat, physically put a different clothing on, or,
Turn your hat around.
Right, yeah, exactly, exactly. Do something very physical that makes it really clear that we're stepping out for a moment.
Well, when you don't have a lot of space to work with, how can you step out so they know you are not in the teaching space when you are specifically talking about the process?
So you could, I guess, also physically step out.
Right.
And say now, and even maybe have a zone, this is the zone of presenter voice.
Yeah, a hula hoop over there.
Yeah, there you go. That's a great idea. I love that.
You step in.
Yes, yes.
So as you think about the lesson and its unfolding, you said there were some bumps. Are those things that you want to tweak now? Are they bumps? Talk about what you mean by bumps.
I think there are probably a couple different kinds of bumps. There are the bumps that are just that, it was the first time we were doing it, so
Sure.
it wasn't smooth. It was a little bit. There were the bumps around encountering, we had anticipated one bump in particular, which is that we would perhaps be challenging a practice that, not that people in the room had, but that people that they might be presenting to had, and that might provide some kind of, for people. And so wanting to be thoughtful about how we share this out so that it's, so that messengers don't get shot.
Right.
And then there were the things that we didn't anticipate. Like, for example, there was a point in the lesson where I gave an instruction, and it was one of those classic teaching moments where, like, within 5 minutes, nearly every table had said, we don't really get what we're supposed to be doing here. So it was like a perfect thing that this is not a clear activity. I mean, this is not clear. And the wonderful thing about working with this group is that they are also very analytical, and they're able to say, well, if you would just do this, I think that would help straighten it out. And so that, I guess, is the other, there are things that we will want to fix in the materials that we're giving to people so that they have the right stuff in front of them. And then there are the things that they're just going to want to tweak because they're knowledgeable about the context of their buildings and how best to share this out in ways that will make sense to the people in their buildings.
Well, you've really talked about a number of things here. One is what you're going to do to be clearer in your instruction, and another part is what the buildings might do to tweak to make it their own.
Yep.
Also, you're talking about being presenting information that not everybody might like to hear, and you don't want the messenger shot.
Right.
So that's a really important thing to teach them about third point.
Yes.
And being very purposeful about the paper being separate from the relationship.
Yes.
Or what it is a tool for improvement. It is not a rival kind of thing.
So one of the things that we were doing was we gave people 3 worksheets. They were all bad. None of them had a clear learning target. One of them was a word search. And so the idea is there are these things that are out there that are published that are not good materials, and that you need to be, as the teacher, you need to be very critical. You have to have that critical edge about, does this, what is my learning target, and then is this particular worksheet or this activity going to help kids get there? So I'm wondering, what you said is really important. What are some ways that they might be able to take, to not be contaminated by the worksheet, So I guess I'm looking for some ideas about that.
Well, one thing, if you wanted, one idea, is to have the worksheet up on the screen. And
Okay.
then you, a part of the group, looking at the worksheet and saying, what would you see the learning targets in this? What might be an advantage? What would be the disadvantages?
Okay.
Another way would be to have one per table, so it's not in front of one specific person. Some other ways that I think probably having it on a screen or on a large chart off to the side is probably one of the strategies that I would choose.
And then the presenter can stand back with everyone else, with all the
Exactly.
participants, and they can be looking at it together
Yes.
to come up with that. That makes some sense to me. Yeah.
Or you have them posted and you have teams looking at them and saying, what could this learning target be? So it's not one person's worksheet that's up there, but a collaborative looking at that specific piece.
So maybe you could have charts around the room with some good and bad examples.
Right.
And then groups could rotate and make some comments on the chart about that example. And, okay.
And part of that too is the scaffolding ahead of time. What is the criteria for something that is clear as far as a target,
Mhm.
rather than just saying this is something they already use, that you're going to ask people to defend.
Right, right. Okay, that's helpful.
So what are some of the things that you did to cause it to go well today? I know you can pick the other things
I know.
apart.
Well, I thought, I thought long and hard about, and I'm always kind of tweaking, and all night long I'm kind of dreaming, processing, and getting up in the morning and making adjustments, and just kind of playing things through in my mind. I think a really important thing was teaming with Roz, and just, kind of laying out, here's some thoughts, and then she and I just worked together to really, to refine it, hone it down, and kind of bounce ideas off of each other, and so that was huge. And then I think just, I'd been around the block, and just being able to read an audience, and say, oh, okay, well, that didn't work, and that kind of thing, and maybe not being too wedded to the plan. That caused some issues as well, just in terms of our overall plan for the morning.
That flexibility is really important.
Yes, flexibility and responsiveness.
Yes. So as you look at this morning, what are some of the generalizations that you're going to carry forward in planning your next lesson?
I think that one is to really take that idea to heart about how differentiated we need to be as we're approaching this. I think the second big take-home for me is really grounding it back in the language of the framework, and make sure, it's a little hard because, like everybody else, I have my own training and my own language and words that have described things, and sometimes I forget that, no, the purpose here, and Jack did a nice job today of kind of tying that back in, the purpose here is to take those things, but to ground them in the language of the framework, and so I think really attending to that as we're planning. And also just to keep that idea of how we really, the people who are doing this work, I just treasure so much, and I really want to be sure that they are supported in every possible way, by me, by the principals in their buildings, by Roz, by the materials we give them, and then by structuring things so that they don't become the messengers, so that they're just really just partners and supports in the learning about the framework that the teachers in the buildings are doing. I think that's
So there are some real key things that you're taking away for you to ponder,
important.
as well as the whole idea of differentiating and how that might best play out.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Barbara.